When you're alone and life is making you lonely, you can always go downtown. When you've got worries, all the noise and the hurry seems to help, I know. Downtown, just listen to the music of the traffic in the city. Linger on the sidewalk where the neon signs are pretty. How can you lose? The lights are much brighter there. You can't forget all your troubles, forget all your cares. So go downtown. Things will be great when you're downtown. No final place for sure. Downtown, everything's waiting for you. Downtown. Don't hang around and let your problems surround you. There are movie shows downtown. Maybe you know some little places to go to where they never close. Downtown, just listen to the rhythm of a gentle bossa nova. You'll be dancing with them too before the night is over. Happy again. The lights are much brighter there. You can forget all your troubles, forget all your cares. So go downtown, where all the lights are bright. Downtown, waiting for you tonight. Downtown, you're gonna be
The following is an educational examination of one of the longest-running cold cases in Alaska. Depictions were limited to the primary victim, potential suspects, and any locations or persons possibly connected to the occurrence. We are omitting the names of officers involved and other victims relative to the suspects, as our focus is on the case in question. This information has been organized into an approximate, comprehensive, linear structure to tell the story best. Any open-ended questions or observations should be considered possibilities, the purpose of which is to invite the question, what if? Anchorage, a small town with a population near 135,000, made up approximately 42% of Alaska during 1971. Celia Van Zanten, nicknamed Beth, went missing around Christmas time that year. She was 18 years old and raised as a Mormon with a close-knit family. After high school, she moved into a large house on Nick Avenue in South Anchorage with her 3 older brothers and a foster cousin named Greg. Neighbors reported that a rough bunch often hung around their home. The Van Zantens also threw regular, loud parties. Their parents lived elsewhere in Anchorage, but described Beth as very happy, well-grounded, and curious. She was looking forward to Christmas with her family. On the day she went missing, December 22nd, she returned from shopping with her mother, aunt, and cousin to find 2 of her 3 brothers home smoking cannabis. They were viewing a film titled The Whole World is Watching, a flick about youth radicals in the late 1960s. Her mother and aunt had dropped her off before heading to Swoboda's restaurant for a late night out. Sometime later, around 8:30 p.m., Beth announced she was leaving for the buy-low store to pick up some soda, possibly to satisfy her munchies craving, or was this merely a cover to shield a secret purpose from her brothers? It was freezing outside, but the buy-low store was close, less than 1 mile, and she had honed her skills as a hitcher of late. Beth told her brothers, "I'll be back soon. I have to babysit for Greg's friend tonight." The buy-low store would close by 9 p.m., so she grabbed her coat and headed out. From here, witness sightings create a confusing timeline of when and where Beth was spotted. She was seen near and far from her home over the next 3 hours. Did Beth ever intend on going to the bylaw, or was she visiting a nearby neighbor or person, or perhaps working a side job? Around 8:45 p.m., a witness claimed to have seen her on her way to the store, heading east on Northern Lights Boulevard. Around 15 minutes after that, a second witness, their neighbor on Nick, caught her heading south on Captain Cook, a street only blocks from her home. To be heading south, she would have had to have first gone north into the neighborhood, opposite the direction of the Bi-Lo or any other store. When the neighbor passed, she was spotted standing under an illuminated lamppost at the intersection with Nick, speaking to a man inside a dark-colored car, which was parked next to her, with the door open. Around an hour later, at 10 p.m., another witness claimed to see Beth walking away from her home. And between 10 and 11 p.m., a fourth witness claimed to see her standing on Northern Lights Boulevard, hitchhiking. She hitchhiked quite a lot, the neighbor claimed.
I've given her several rides in the past. Perhaps she finally found what she was looking for.
Employees of the Bi-Lo each stated they never saw or served Beth that night. Her brothers finished watching their flick. They were admittedly curious as to why their sister never returned, but assumed Greg had given her a ride to her babysitting job. So, they went about their night, smoking and enjoying themselves. It was not until 2 days later that her brothers reported her missing to the police, found dead the next morning. So, what happened to Beth after her last sighting? Early morning, Christmas Day, McHugh State Park. 2 amateur photographers, brothers, ventured out for a photo shoot. Dennis and Gary Lawler. They approached a small ledge near a picnic area with a beautiful view. Dennis brandished his camera and focused on what he thought was a mannequin covered with snow. The mannequin was behind a bush at the bottom of the cliff. He pulled out a zoom lens and studied it, only to realize he was looking at a human body, a girl. A sense of panic washed over him. The brothers rushed to town and immediately reported to the local authorities. The body was Beth's. Unclothed from the waist down, she had been gagged, and there were signs of rape. There were bruises all over her body, lacerations from a knife crossing her bra and chest, and her bound hands wrapped in speaker wire were behind her back. Whomever the killer or killers were, police determined that during and after her initial assault, Beth fought them. She managed to escape the attacker somewhere in the parking lot. Her flight from danger was short-lived, though. She was either forced off or fell off a cliff edge into a ravine near McHugh Creek, breaking several bones on impact. The steep rocky walls were too difficult to ascend with her hands tied behind her back, but police did find signs of her unsuccessful attempt to climb out. She froze in the snow, alone, and remained there until the Lawler brothers' arrival. Tire tracks circled the parking lot. Police expect that these are an indication that the attacker circled the lot for some time, expecting Beth would return from the frigid temperatures, only, in her haste, she fell over the ledge. Let's take a look at the 3 primary suspects. First, foster cousin Greg. He was never arrested, but was widely considered the person with the most significant motive. Greg not only lived in the same house, but friends and family reported frequent arguments and a palpable, unspoken sexual tension between the two, particularly on Greg's behalf. Could Greg and Beth have been in a secret relationship? Was the babysitting job a cover to block the brothers from the truth? They were spending the night together. Did the police ever ask Greg's friends if they were more than foster cousins? Could her death have been resultant of a lover's quarrel? Greg himself had requested Beth to babysit for his friend that night. When pressed for his whereabouts, local PD confirmed that they had detained Greg and a group of his friends elsewhere. The group had been caught drunk driving and stoned in a late model blue Ford car. Police interviewed Greg and her brothers at the fly-by-night garage the day after Christmas. When questioning Greg, he reportedly appeared unusually nervous. Greg began quivering and crying shortly after the lead detective asked him if he had any speaker wire lying around. The officer then gave Greg an ominous stare and began inspecting the premises for evidence. Another officer later stated that he believed Greg was spending an inordinate amount of time with the family in the days after her disappearance in order to blend in and appear innocent. Police never found that speaker wire or any additional evidence. They kept tabs on Greg for quite some time, though. If Beth was supposed to babysit for Greg's friend, was it one of the friends riding with Greg that night? If so, Greg would have known that Beth never showed up. Why did he not inform her brothers immediately? If Greg's friend, any friend, regardless of if they were riding with Greg or not, authentically needed a babysitter, did they hire another one? What changed when Beth never arrived? This final question is important because if no babysitter was needed, why did Beth and Greg give her brothers a reason to believe she would be out late? It's even possible that if Beth had taken up a side job of prostitution, using hitchhiking and babysitting gigs as a cover, Greg was fully aware of this and provided the alibi to her brothers on her behalf. What if the officers who confirmed Greg's whereabouts were involved in or agreed to cover up Beth's disappearance? It would create an airtight, extremely simple to fabricate alibi. There were no cell phones or security cameras. The group of teens could have arrived at the station at 2 a.m. only to be booked and fingerprinted under the timestamp of 8 p.m. However, why would any officer do that? What if the teens duped a good-hearted officer into believing the event was an accident? The officer may not have understood the extent of her injuries. They may have been lied to. Greg and his friends could have claimed that Beth tripped over a cliff and that Greg worried about blame because of their frequent arguments. Well, he's a good old boy, they might have said to themselves. No sense in two lives being lost because of an accident. If that were the case, the officers could have agreed to protect Greg or potentially one of his friends from the criminal justice system before finding out about the rape, slashing, and possible push 3 days later. If that were so, would that officer then double back and release to the public that they had falsely detained Greg and his friends that night? Or is it more likely that they would ensure no one ever found any evidence or had any reason to suspect the kids or themselves? Perhaps they would go so far as to make it look like the work of other, more notable suspects, local gangs, or even an unknown assailant. Of course, there's always the worst-case scenario, in which the officers were directly involved or responsible. One officer connected to Greg's detainment claimed,
I know that girl that was murdered very well. I've known her for 18 years. I did not see her at all that night.
Keep in mind, if this officer knew Beth his entire life, had he not known Greg and his friends? Was that officer their age? Or did he have children who were their classmates? These are all important considerations when attempting to rule out the aforementioned scenarios. For the second suspect, we have to take an in-depth look at one of Anchorage's active serial killers, the infamous Gary Zieger, who acted impulsively and with little regard for covering his tracks. In the summer of 1971, Zieger raped and murdered his first known victim of at least a dozen, a hitchhiking young Native American boy. This event occurred in front of another man who was riding inside of Zieger's truck at the time. The witness only came forward after his fiancée begged him to, out of fear of what might happen if they continued association with Zieger. The witness had a 9mm pistol on him. Zieger discovered this and somehow convinced the witness to let him hold his pistol. He then pressed it to the boy's head and demanded he perform oral sex on Zieger in front of the other passenger. After the boy had finished, Zieger drove to the Anchorage landfill and told the boy to get out. They stood in front of a small ditch. Zieger pressed the barrel to the boy's skull and pulled the trigger. The witness, terrified, and after being dropped off by Zieger, broke down and described the events to his fiancée. 2 months after the disappearance of Beth, a soon-to-be abducted 18-year-old girl left a nightclub with an unidentified male. Her body was found at a truck yard on the eastern side of Anchorage early the following day. She had been beaten, raped, and stabbed. She was unconscious, but died shortly after being found. In late August, another man, whom Zieger had given a ride, witnessed Zieger stop and pick up a young woman after he himself had gotten out of the vehicle. He noted that Zieger had kept a large knife in open view on the dashboard. After numerous witnesses claimed to see the woman riding around town with Zieger over the following days, she was found dead. A witness saw the two kissing. Another witnessed the girl washing his truck on the side of the road. The lady hitchhiker had been taken to a gravel pit and was left there severely beaten with an especially bloodied face, stripped of clothes below the waist and raped and hidden within shrubbery under a tree. Unusual tire tracks were found circling the gravel pit parking lot. The suspicious tracks were determined to show that 3 tires were mounted in reverse. When police obtained a warrant to search Zieger's truck, they found 3 of his tires were reversed. Regarding Beth and the tire marks in the campground parking lot at McHugh State Park, there is little information. Were molds of those tire prints taken? During the trial for Zieger regarding the woman found in the gravel pit, the DA tested multiple blood stains inside Zieger's truck. Some were on the door handle, inside the passenger window, and on the passenger seat. There were tufts of human hair, female, the same color as the victim's, found stuck in the blood stain on the seat. However, after review, the blood stains were either found to be human or high primate and ascertained as unmatchable generic blood. What would Zieger be doing driving around with and murdering primates? If he were murdering primates, where did he come by them? Were primates only mentioned as a distractor due to intimidation from Zieger or persons he was associated with? To be fair, it is plausible that there was a black market exotic animal trade in Anchorage at the time. What if the lady hitchhiker had witnessed Zieger murdering one of these primates while she sat in the back seat and the primate rode shotgun, perhaps seatbelted, for safety? Illegal trafficking of and killing exotic, particularly endangered species is a major crime. To sever any loose ends, after washing most evidence from his truck, would Zieger then kill her? The judge later ruled that the tire prints at the gravel pit were inconclusive matches to Zieger's. Were Zieger's tire prints treated with minimal regard, and is it possible they overlooked the patterns found at McHugh State Park? If the police made molds of each set of prints, which they should have, were they ever compared? Zieger was acquitted of the gravel pit murder due to these inconclusive facts and walked free. Later that year, he successfully joined a biker gang known as the Brothers or Hell's Angels. Shortly after joining them, Zieger killed the owner of a club massage parlor. Charges were never filed or never stuck, as even though it was in front of numerous witnesses, no one would talk to the police. Police determined that Zieger murdered at least a dozen individuals and likely numerous others. They could not determine whether or not he killed Beth Van Zanten. As was the case in many of his crimes, Zieger was careful to ensure some surviving witnesses could spread the word and add to his infamous lore, but no third party ever came forward regarding Beth. However, they were the same age, and the Van Zantens often threw regular house parties. Might he have ever attended one of these? Regardless, he often acted impulsively, so we cannot rule out that Zieger passed Beth on the street before offering her a ride, nor, had she taken up a side job as a prostitute, that Zieger could have been one of her regular customers, or was perhaps even a secret boyfriend. The third and final suspect. Robert Hansen was just getting started on a dozen-year killing spree. Dubbed the Butcher Baker, as he owned a small bakery in Anchorage, he died in prison in 2014 at the age of 75. He would have been 31 years old when Beth went missing, possibly his first ever murder. He admitted to killing 17 women in the wilderness, and DNA linked him to over 30 rapes. It is noteworthy that Hansen was a pathological liar and narcissist whose claims of innocence were often disproven after the fact. Only later in his life did he admit to guilt concerning the cold cases when enough evidence piled up. As recently in late 2021, a 20-year Jane Doe corpse was added to his victim list when DNA evidence linked Hansen to her rape. In the early 1970s, Hansen typically chose young women between the ages of 16 and 19. They were often not sex workers, but his targeted age ranges eventually swelled as high as 41 years. Many of those later victims became prostitutes and loners. He started pursuing persons he believed had no families, stalking them for a time before ever interacting. He did this because it dawned on him that they were less likely to be reported missing, and he wanted to continue killing. On November 21st that year, Hansen followed a young real estate professional home and used a ridiculous excuse to get inside of her house, which the girl allowed. From there, he made physical demands of her before returning days later with a firearm to make even more demands. He threatened to kill her if she screamed or refused to get into his vehicle, but his attempt at kidnapping was unsuccessful. Less than a month later, on December 19th, 3 days before Beth went missing, Hansen successfully kidnapped a prostitute. He bound her, drove her south on the Seward Highway in Kenai Peninsula, where he took her into the wilderness. He raped her, threatened not only to kill her but her parents and children if she ever spoke to authorities. This rape victim came forward with her father on December 26th, claiming,
"I'm afraid he'll do what he did to us to other girls."
She was certain that the man who raped her was Beth's killer. Hansen's preferred slaying weapons were a mini Ruger 14 and a buck knife, though he owned numerous firearms. He sometimes coerced women to voluntarily join him on an adventure, promising a fancy plane ride to a mountain cabin on his personal aircraft. If that did not work, he often forced them into his vehicle, where he would drive them into the wild, taking them to a profoundly wooded, usually mountainous location, before advising them, "A hunt's about to begin," brandishing his rifle or knife with a smile on his face, "and you're the prey." Many died at his hands, but not all. Of the 13 women who survived his 30 at least confirmed rapes, most were let go, while others fought back and escaped. There were close to 40 cold case murders in which authorities have since labeled Hansen as the prime suspect or confirmed killer. Eventually, police were warranted to search his house, where they found an aeronautical chart hidden behind his headboard. The chart had 37 X's over different wilderness locations. Many of those X's marked the spots of his 17 confirmed victims, which only later did he admit to hunting. Bivens, Hansen's neighbor, who claimed he was not Hansen's friend but reportedly someone who he hunted with, began reloading ammo with, and shared numerous family meals with over the years, tipped police that Hansen had spent a reasonable amount of time on the Nick River using his powerboat to traverse. Police studied the aeronautical chart and noticed several X's marked along the islands and banks of the Nick. They searched these northeast locations, unearthing several Jane Doe bodies near where he and Bivens had hunted regularly for sheep. Hansen denied any role in their disappearance. Many of the Jane Doe cases are still unsolved, but they have been pinned on Hansen because of his location marking and activities. That same neighbor and Hansen's wife, daughter, and sister-in-law were Hansen's alibi on December 22nd, a pizza dinner at Larry Bivens' house. An excerpt from Hansen's written police statement. "Spent the rest of the afternoon from 2 to 4 p.m. with my wife and sister-in-law and daughter, then left to Larry Bivens on 6th Street. Pizza supper. Left there about 10:30. Went home with my wife and daughter." It is worth noting, relative to fact-changing, that there is no 6th Street near either of the addresses Hansen lived during the 1970s, nor is 6th Street near his bakery. It is northeast of the bakery by about 10 miles, and around 7 from Hansen's nearest house. Bivens and Hansen each described one another as neighbors. There is an East 6th Avenue located a quarter mile in either direction from both of Hansen's houses. Hansen, a known sociopathic narcissist, serial murderer, and habitual liar, frequently went days at a time without sleep. It is entirely plausible that he left Bivens' home around 10:30 p.m., picked Beth up after her final sighting around 11 p.m., and did not return home until he had to prepare for work early the following morning. Even if he claimed he left Bivens' home with his wife and stepdaughter, would they tell police that the murderous, abusive man they lived with was lying? Hansen often claimed the public was out to jump on board of the infamous culture wave against him. he fiercely defended himself in the 17 murders, stating that they were each the fault of the women who somehow targeted him and attacked him. One of those X's on his map was eerily close to the location of Beth's body in McHugh State Park. Ultimately convicted of only 4 killings in a plea deal exchanged for his admission of guilt, Hansen was sentenced to 461 years in prison, where he would surely die, and die he did. The mostly recovered remains of the 17 total admitted victims are solved cases. However, investigations are still ongoing in the other 20-plus instances, including Beth's, where Hansen is a prime suspect. The following quote is Hansen's official written statement and alibi provided to police regarding his whereabouts on December 22, 1971. Went to work at 4:45 December 22, 1971. Got through work at 2 p.m., went home to 327 Thomas Court. Spent the rest of the afternoon from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. with my wife and sister-in-law and daughter, then left to Larry Bivens on 6th Street, pizza supper. Left there about 10:30, went home with my wife and daughter. Went to bed about 11 p.m., got up again about 4:30, dressed and arrived at work around 4:45 a.m., Thursday. Worked until 2 p.m. Later, Hansen would present other alibis about other murder victims, which police often discovered were false statements. However, they could not prove the above information was factually a lie, as the aforementioned parties backed his story. If Hansen murdered Beth, could he have mistaken her for a sex worker? She was hitchhiking alone, late at night in a rough patch of town, only 5 to 6 miles from his home, and less than 3 from his bakery. Is it merely an unusual coincidence that Beth lived on Nick Avenue and several Jane Doe bodies were discovered along the Nick River? Hansen did stick to his habits. Were other butcher-baker victims bound with speaker wire, rope, or handcuffs? Unlike Zieger, Hansen acted nearly compulsively. The answer could offer some clarification. After threatening and releasing the first 2 girls, the real estate professional and the prostitute, why was Beth not released? As noted, police believed she fought her attacker and even escaped temporarily. The notion that she fought back is the primary difference between the 3 girls. Were the others simply too submissive for Hansen? Did Beth's fight spark his willingness to kill? If Hansen circled the parking lot, he may have been waiting for Beth to return. Whether intending to kill or release can never be known. To public knowledge, he had only beaten, raped, and threatened by this point in his life. Could Beth have been the first murder Robert Hansen ever committed? Whether she tripped over the cliff ledge or Hansen pushed her, the result was the same: death. Could he have learned of this days after the fact, a realization that sparked the fire within his belly, burning for more murder? There is, of course, always a 4th scenario, in which an entirely unidentified suspect picked Beth up off the side of the road and took her to McHugh. After leaving her house, seen off and on over the next 3 hours, hitchhiking, any scenario is possible. Keep in mind that no state has a higher murder rate per capita than Alaska. Of all 50 U.S. states, Alaska has produced the highest number of serial killers, with a staggering 15.65 murders per 1 million residents, according to a study on crimecapsule.com. We hope Beth's crime will be accurately solved, and we will keep tabs on this story and update our findings as time progresses. But for now, we have to ask ourselves, what if?